Right, go for it.
Another day his hair starts true. I need a shoe. A travelling circus cane. I need a cheese. Bought an intelligent elephant, and Nellie was her name. One dark night she slipped her iron chain, and off she ran to Hindustan, and was never seen again. The elephant packed her trunk and said goodbye to the circus. Off she went with a trumpety trump, 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 trump. Elephant packed her trunk and said back to the jungle. Off she went with a trumpety trump, 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 trump. The head of the herd was calling far, far away. They met the silver one night. Why don't the silver lights on the windows?
Mandalay.
Mandalay.
Nellie the
Elephant packed her trunk and said goodbye to the circus. Off she went with her trumpety trump, 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 trump. Once upon a time, a little girl called Miss Dawn Tuffery. And once upon a time, she had a brother called Mr. Tuffery.
Once upon a time, my family and I lived in a small Cornish village called Greensplat. Nowadays, it's a hole, not the proverbial one-horse town, but a giant moon crater in the ground. Once, Greensplat was a thriving village with its own brass band. When we lived there, there were 7 houses and my dad with his guitar. Now there's nothing there. We first lived in Greensplat as guests in a house called Kenwyn. We were used to the regular blasting from the China clay mines nearby. This will prepare me well for earthquakes in New Zealand later on. My parents explained this as God moving pianos. This also explained thunderstorms, so presumably God was looking after a lot of pianos. In the days before Skype, we used to record cassettes for my grandmother in New Zealand. This wasn't always an easy process.
It's just before bedtime and we're going to get a few family noises on. Then I'm going to whip the kids up to... Don't poke! Whip the kids up to bed and finish this myself so that it can get to you, poor deprived person who hasn't had a tape yet. Dawn, don't sit in front of it or it won't record properly. Toby, what are you trying to do?
I'm trying to push his buttons.
Yeah, you're not allowed to push buttons, Toby.
I'm thinking.
Greensplat was just up the road from Sandorstall, up being the operative word. The Sandorstall area is renowned for China clay mining. China clay is used for things like ceramics, medicine, toothpaste, cosmetics, light bulbs, and food additives. The bulk of China clay is added to paper to make it white and glossy. China clay has been a major part of the Cornish economy for a long time, thanks largely to a Quaker chemist called William Cookworthy. He was an interesting character who walked 200 miles to get his first job in London because he couldn't afford the coach fare. By the 1740s, he was running a successful pharmacy in Plymouth, supplying merchant ships and entertaining Captain Cook. Cookworthy was approached by an American businessman to create porcelain in England using imported clay, but decided to have a look for minerals locally. In 1746, he discovered China clay in Tregonning Hill near Helston. Since then, we've used an awful lot of it. The Sandorstall China clay deposits are the largest in the world, producing over 120 million tons of China clay so far. For every ton extracted, more than 9 tons of waste is left. Some of this is sold, and the rest is dumped, creating the distinctive mountains or boroughs that surround the pits.
Reminders of Greensplat's mining heritage were all around, such as the railway carriage house at the bottom of our garden.
Funny sort of house, that.
Do you know what it's made from?
What?
This one. It's made from 2 railway carriages side by side, with a roof over the gap in between. Quite a good idea, isn't it?
Did someone build that and then they moved in?
Clarence remembers when they pulled them up the hill with horses.
We always enjoyed going down the road to visit Clarence and Marion. Clarence used to put me on his knee and say,
"Down, down in the deep blue sea, catching fishes for my tea. 1, 2, 3, up she comes."
Greensplat was a fun place to be small. We played a lot in the maple tree with Holly and Ross or Aisling and Jasmine, avoiding adders and the invisible man. We built houses in deep ditches and threw dead grass snakes at each other. We had a lot of goats as well. Mine was called Lucky and Toby's was called Billy. We taped Gilbert and Sullivan operettas off the radio and reenacted them. I wanted to grow up and be a mezzo-soprano and play Phoebe in Yeoman of the Guard. Option 2 was to be an author and write more stories about Tiny Garden and his band of men. We did a lot of exploring in the Greensplat countryside.
We're going for
a walk later.
Yeah.
An adventure.
Yeah. With our boots on, letting in puddles. Yeah.
Sometimes we were just rowdy. After living in Kenwyn, we moved into a caravan in the garden. This caravan later burned down while my mother was making bread. My brother and I were told to get out now. We watched from up on the hill as my mum frantically threw our things outside. Soon, a brand new caravan appeared, taking up the whole road and most of the neighbours as it was manoeuvred into place inch by inch.
Do you want to tell Alison anything else? Because it'll be bedtime soon.
Alison, I got a song about our caravan that burnt down.
Oh, and you
All
sing
the
that then.
minutes is a better. What shall we do if our caravan is burnt down?
What happens if this caravan burns down?
Go bus.
Well, what?
Go bus.
We'll get a bus.
This is the church. This is the people. Open the doors and there's the people.
Greensplat's Methodist Chapel was just down the road from us. My parents would go down there with friends and juggle under its high ceilings. In 1990, a poll tax was introduced. I didn't know what this was, but it sounded ominous. We left the country. Greensplat was built on clay, but to get more clay you have to go deeper and wider. This would finally be the end for the village. 7 years after we left, the chapel was bulldozed. This meant that officially Greensplat ceased to be a village and was now a hamlet. Over in New Zealand, my Uncle Owen and Aunt Kathy were living in a Greensplat of their own because my cousins there liked the name. This wooden hut half a world away would eventually outlast its namesake. Kenwyn ended up the last house left in Greensplat. It became a bit of a symbol for the vanished village.
Kenwyn, do not demolish,
Was scrawled across its walls. This looked like a protest, but was actually there to protect some native bats living in the roof who had to be evacuated before the bulldozers came. Once the bats were out, the machinery moved in. "20 years after leaving Greensplat, I went back to visit. Up from St Austell, under the aqueduct, past the stream where there was always an old shopping trolley. The Greensplat pit is huge and different. I can't remember where anything was. I should have brought a map. The road I was going to take now goes nowhere. I stay a while and think of Kenwyn and the caravans and the singing and the goats. But there's a chill in the air and it's too cold to stay for long.
Let the feathers falling down, falling down. Let the feathers falling down, falling down. Let the feathers falling down, they fly lazy.
Say it, because I think it's time for bed now.
Good
Don't
night,
hang on.
Alison.
Good night, Alison.
Good night, Alison. Good night, Alison. Good night, Alison.
Right, everybody's
Good night,
going to
Elephant.
sleep, and Toby's going to turn the tape off. The bottom one, the bottom one.